You're listening to Hello Moxie with Nicole Donnelly. In each episode, we honor the unbreakable thread that connects the fierce women who came before us to modern-day pioneers carving their own paths. We'll share stories of unforgettable heroines, celebrate their courage, and bring to light the lasting impact they've had across generations. Get inspired by the stories of those who embody true Moxie and pave the way for others to follow. Hello Moxie is sponsored by DMG Digital, a woman-owned marketing consultancy dedicated to helping B2B companies and e-commerce brands create exceptional customer experiences.
Hello and welcome to Hello Moxie. Today, I am so delighted to be joined by Mary Charleson. Mary and I met last year. It's been almost a year ago now that we met at Mark Schaefer's Uprising, which is a marketing retreat that he hosts twice a year in beautiful Knoxville, Tennessee. And we sat together the first night at dinner, and I was just so enamored by Mary. I'll never forget her sharing with me. She's probably not going to remember this, but one of the things she shared is that she likes to still get the newspaper, and I can't remember which one it is, but she has it delivered, the paper version of the newspaper every Sunday, because she likes to force herself to read things that she wouldn't normally choose for herself or that social media wouldn't feed to her. And I was just like, I just thought that was such a brilliant, cool thing and says a lot about Mary and who she is. So, but anyway, I digress. I would love to turn it over to Mary. And Mary, maybe you can give a little bit of background to our listeners about who you are, and you're a very Renaissance woman. So tell our listeners.
Oops, sorry. We're just going to put that into silent mode. Bad timing. all the other prep that we did, I forgot to turn off my ringer.
No worries at all. It's nice to hear that ringer. It's been a while since I've heard a ringer like that.
I know. That's honest to God. That sounds almost as old school as my newspaper experience. Incidentally, it was the Globe and Mail. I am Canadian. Globe and Mail on Saturday, but I actually am a fairly regular reader of the New York Times as well. And so, being a good Canadian, I try to spread around BBC, you name it. But so my background. Well, I mean, I've made my living in my life as a marketing strategist, and my website 5minutemarketing.com is where I've done marketing consulting, speaking, writing for the last almost 25 plus years. And we'll get into it later in the conversation, I'm sure. But in around 2018, I launched a second brand because what do overachievers do? They decide to go for two brands.
I'm right there with you, Mary.
called carryonqueen.com. And it was based on the premise that I never checked a bag, never have, never will, for travel or for pleasure travel. And so I'd always written kind of for media on the side, travel writing. It was kind of my second passion. And so I decided to do a little bit more with that and develop that. And that's sort of where I'm finding opportunity at the cross section of the two brands, speaking about marketing to the travel industry, but really also kind of focusing on developing out the content creation on the travel side and working with DMOs. So I'm bridging two brands at this stage. I think that would be fair to say.
I love it. You're forging your own path and doing it your own way. And what a beautiful way to like bring those two brands together. That's so exciting. Very exciting.
Well, it is curious in that I didn't, honestly, like the second brand, I sort of I didn't even put it on my LinkedIn profile initially because I thought I don't want to confuse people because I was working in marketing and then it's like, well, I'm writing. It's like, oh my God, what are you doing, Mary? And it was COVID that really brought them together because coming out of the pandemic, the travel industry had been beaten down and I saw opportunity there for helping them with. All of a sudden they had new audiences that you were speaking to, right? The domestic travel, you had, very different products that you were offering. And there was a lot of changes and shifts that were going on. And so I saw opportunity there. I was invited to speak down in Las Vegas to the Las Vegas Travel Agents Forum. It's one of the largest kind of conferences for travel agents in the US. And that was kind of the beginning of uniting, kind of finding opportunity at the intersection of the two brands. And that's something I continue to do. I've been speaking there every year for the last 4 years.
Love that.
Yeah.
I was at my daughter's theater showcase in January. She's such a like theater buff.
Mm.
And she was in this competition in Atlanta in January. And one of the panelists that we heard speak happened to be he grew up doing musical theater. He had a beautiful voice, beautiful singing voice. He sang for us, but he also was a neuroscientist.
Mm.
So he still did musical theater, but his main passion was, in neuroscience. And he said, we live in multitudes. And I thought that was so
Mm.
beautiful. I think this is like a really, like, you're a great example of that. Like sometimes I think, we may feel like we need our identity is around one thing, but I think it's so beautiful to just embrace the multitudes in our life as women and as
Mm.
people. And I think that you've really been able to do that so well with these two brands and make it part of really just owning those multitudes and making it more of like a holistic broadening, if you will, of
Yeah,
who you
well,
are.
I mean, I love building things, and
Mm.
but and it's just curious to create,
Yes.
that the notion of creating something that didn't exist, and and being able to then help, help people that, target audience, your clients. In the case of marketing, in the case of
Mm.
writing, it's, inspiring an audience to visit destinations, but it's also, in this, as I said, this weird way, also helping DMOs, right, through content creation, in terms of writing, but approaching it from the perspective of like, I get this. I've worked in marketing for the last 25
Mhm.
plus years. I understand what you're doing, but I also understand the division of kind of, we used to call it church and state, editorial and sales. They're a whole lot more together these days,
They are, aren't they? Yeah.
but I do understand the traditional role of both of those departments and the ethics of, how
Mm.
they shouldn't necessarily cross pollinate too much. But anyway, so I can bring a whole lot of kind of history to that, to DMOs if I'm working with them. But a lot of the content that I write on the site is, it is for, it's paid editorial. It's not kind of like
Mm.
collaboration and placement. So there's a mix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I consider you to be such a like adventurous woman. I mean, it's just so remarkable the way that you choose to live and how you travel.
Hmm.
I mean, you've ice skated on Lake Louise. You've
You saw my
hiked to
post.
Yeah, you've hiked to Machu. Like, and when I think of Lake Louise,
Right.
traditionally I think of Lake Louise in the summer.
Of course.
So,
Right.
right. So I think you have this really cool non-traditional way of seeing and exploring the world, like ice skating on Lake Louise, hiking to Machu Picchu, fishing in Belize, learning to surf in the like, I just think you're extremely curious and adventurous, and I really admire that about you. And I wonder, like, are you really disciplined about feeding your curiosity? Like, do you have routines or practices to cultivate that, or is it just like this organic essence of you that you just spontaneously just do?
Well, I think we could go kind of down the travel rabbit hole, but I do think
Mhm.
that travel causes you to be curious because you're in new locations, you're meeting new people, there's new cultures, you're breaking your usual patterns to new patterns, you're learning to see new viewpoints of people, like you're not,
Mhm.
you're more tolerant, all of those things, you understand differences, all of those things make you naturally curious about people, about life, locations, and it also, in an interesting way, it makes you open to serendipity, and I think that's something that maybe we could use a little bit more in our day-to-day lives, not necessarily needing to be open to serendipity and just travel, but it's those moments where like you leave, and not everybody's like this when they travel. A lot of people like schedule it regimented, and
Yeah.
I love, I mean, I love a good schedule, love a good spreadsheet, but I also love these open, deliberately planning for open time periods where if you happen to meet this person yesterday and they're in the cafe and they're chatting it up and they mentioned that there's this farmers market that it's at this local town, and yeah, my aunt who does these things is, carving or whatever. Like there's something there and you go, okay, I think there might be a really interesting story there. And so, but you've left the time to do that. And so I do think that Being open to serendipity is a huge part of remaining curious.
Mm.
One interesting thing I've started to do in my travels, and then I've used it to complement my blog content, is I started sketching. I, Another, you talk about sort of rediscovering your old passions. Back in my undergrad, I actually did a minor in fine arts, and so I did
Oh.
a lot of sketching. It's something that I've kind of hung up. I haven't really done a lot since. Part
Mhm.
of it is just busy life, career,
Mhm.
raising kids. But I started sketching at locations, and what it does is it forces you to look at things in more detail. So I'll give you an example. Is
Mm.
that we just normally snap a photo, but when you're sketching, you're having to focus in on little details. And so an example that we were in Italy, and so it was in Siena, and I was sketching around this square, and I'm like, there's these like circle things to like tie ups, and then like these little things almost like big candle holders, and I'm focused in on those, and I started asking curious questions later about what these things were. And apparently it was for, centuries ago, when they'd ride in on a horse with a torch. So it was a place to put the torch, and it was also a place to hitch the horse. But it was up high because the person was doing it while they were sitting on the horse. That's a detail you would never have
Yes.
zeroed in on if you just snap the photo. Um, Another cool
Mhm.
example is when we were in Croatia. I was in Hvar, or I guess Var is what the locals call it. And I was sketching, and there's a couple of kind of Gen Zs. They were just kind of, I could see they were mucking around, taking some photos, kind of like this, whatever. And it's like, oh my God, they're probably getting the best photos ever. But I'm sketching away. And I just made some, offhanded comment to them that it looks like you're kind of like doing a little photo shoot for Mamma Mia. And they're like, oh my God, you noticed, right? And there's this whole thing around Viz and, the islands out there that they filmed some of the old Mamma Mia movie. But then she came over and then she was sort of looking at what I was doing and the sketching. And there's this whole conversation that started, and I'm convinced that we wouldn't have had this conversation if it hadn't been for sketching. So, she was asking, so it was just this back and forth, and she was, saying that's so cool. Like it's like you're not taking, photos. You're looking at things, and so that's where I learned that, oh, they're in their 20s. They just finished university. They'd met up from people that were from across, they're Americans, met from different states. They were traveling. Like I probably knew more than what their mom knew about them at that stage, just by an interaction, with them briefly on their travels, prompted by sketching. So bringing that back to curiosity is, doing things sometimes when we're traveling a little bit different, that take us away from our lives that are so devoted to screens, social
Yes.
media, producing content to share in the moment. And now I'm taking that back and I'm putting it within my blog posts, and then I talk about not just there's the visual, but I talk about the experience that happened around the creation of the image, which I don't know. I don't think anybody else is doing that in blog content. Honestly, I don't know if it's just, I'm doing it just to see part of it. It's very personal.
Yeah.
I just, it's kind of enjoyable, but I'm hoping that readers also might find that really interesting. So you'll start to see more of that show up in my European content, which I'm
I
still
love that.
still getting, still putting it out there. All right, it takes a while to get blog posts created, especially when you're writing for other media.
I just think that's so lovely what you just shared about kind of like you're using your hands to sketch out and the detail that you see. It's such a sensory,
Mm.
like a full sensory experience to draw that way. Like I don't draw, but I imagine that it would be. Sometimes I like to paint casually, and I still love to write with a pen and paper.
Mm-hmm.
Love it. I think there's something about the sensory act of using your hands and experiencing the world in that way that we need more of,
Mm.
frankly.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's the thing that makes us so human is that we have the ability to see with our eyes and with our fingers and our hands and use all of our senses to experience the
Mm-hmm.
world. It's what separates us from
Right. Right.
AI.
Right.
And I just think like that's beautiful, a beautiful example for us to really like how can we lean into more of those kinds of experiences, going forward, because it's that's going to separate us from the bots, like those kind of things.
And I think being curious, I think you have to be consciously, you have to take yourself out of the feed, out of the algorithm, and be curious. I mean, circling back to your initial introduction to me, it's part of the reason why I enjoy the newspaper experience, is that I stumble onto things that I might not have found otherwise, and it keeps me open to new ideas, other people's thoughts, opinions. Same thing with reading, right? Being an active reader, listening to different podcasts, right? I mean, congratulations on Hello Moxie for starters, right? But it just expands your horizon, exposes you to new things. I think that's all part of being curious as well. My daughter shared with me, it was called The Life Impossible. It's a book by Matt Haig, I guess it is. And it's about this woman it's an older woman who gets this mysterious letter that she's inherited some property over in Europe. And it's her adventure of going over there and sort of coming at the point when she thought her life was sort of winding down, how it actually kind of starts to really get exciting and adventurous. I'm only just my daughter was home visiting from university in January, and she said, "Haven't you finished it yet?" And I said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Pat." She said, "Like, I did it in one sitting," right? And I started to get into it. I get busy, but just again, would I have picked it up? I don't know, but my daughter recommended it, so and what's really interesting about that, she's like 22, is that she's sort of annotated some things that she thought were really cool within the book. And then for me then to read the book, but then understanding, okay, why did she think this was interesting, right? There's just some really interesting insights that
like
you
a point
get.
of connection.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a way to connect with her and to see her in a different way.
Yeah.
That's really special.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that's so cool. I remember I was reading one of your articles, and when you shared about when you were hiking through Machu Picchu, and it kind of relates to this. You said this beautiful disconnect during our 4 days trekking was only fully appreciated once we were tossed back into the crowds at Machu Picchu, where selfie sticks and the drive to post and share seemed ever present.
Oh my God.
And
yeah. Yeah,
that really resonated with me, because I find I get sucked in. I'm a marketer, and I know you're a social media marketer, and I find myself sucked into, I got to create content. I've got to share this. I've got to take the perfect picture. I've got to look beautiful for the picture that I'm going to share on the social media, and it's got to be all, and it's exhausting, Mary. And so I read that, and it felt, and I read that, and it just hit me at my core. Like, how do you recommend? What do you recommend for us? We're so tied to this digital world, all of us, wherever we are in our lives. How do you recommend that we kind of ground ourselves and find some balance? And I think you've shared a lot about curiosity, which I think is huge. And, using our senses and making sure we're taking time to just surprise ourselves, and serendipity, I think, is huge. But do you have any other advice about how to not get so tied to the, what am I going to share
Turn
today?
this thing off.
That's a great,
I mean, as you read that, I remember that experience. It's actually one of the biggest growing travel trends right now, is this idea of going somewhere where you can completely disconnect. And there's a reason for that, right? Like, we're human beings. We're the largest social experiment that has happened in some time, in terms of what it's doing to our connection or disconnection with others, being so tangled up in our phones. But that experience of being unplugged was remarkable, because it did a couple of things. It forced you were like, you're having conversations. You couldn't go on your phone because we had no connection. You had an excuse to not be posting. And all of a sudden it was okay. It was beautiful. So, I mean, how do we create that now? It's easier said than done, obviously. you can't just walk away from your phone, because it's just very highly impractical. But, trying to be more disciplined about it for sure.
Mhm.
I often find if I post content, like this next series of 7 days, I've been posting some things around travel in Canada. And so when you've got things scheduled,
Yeah.
you tend to go back in there, because, as Richard Bliss says on LinkedIn, you got to make sure you comment back. So if when you're posting things in the morning, right, it's
Mhm.
going to litter throughout your day.
Oh, it's going to
Yeah,
litter throughout your day.
yeah, yeah, because it's you're living your in real
Mhm.
life moments, and then you're living the threads of that you've created, of conversational threads through your social media feeds, through your WhatsApp chat groups, with your, and some of that's fun, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of a meeting, it's really great to see a notification from girlfriends who are asking, who's doing the dinner planning for Friday
Yes.
on our ski holiday. It's like, oh my
Yes.
God, I have a life, right?
Yes. Absolutely.
um, I don't know if I really have any sage advice around that, other than I have made a conscious choice and it was liberating. I was recent travel. I was down in Costa Rica for, it was kind of part work, part pleasure. I was speaking at the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers conference, but I went in a week early and went over and did some surfing over in
Mm.
Tamarindo, and did some traveling around there, and did that for the week before. And then it was like my two lives, right? I stayed at a hostel over on the coast surfing. I got my I do have my limits, though. I stayed in the couples room by myself. Right? It's just like I I'm not doing the top of the bunk anymore. Like, I'm done with that. Those days are over. But I had my own room, and but I
Mhm.
loved the social interaction in the kitchen facilities. But it was like night and day. I went from there, then I went to, like, the Marriott in San
Mhm.
Jose for my professional life. But where was I going with this? Just for that whole week, I didn't post. I
Mhm.
just deliberately didn't post, and then I
And you
did a
decided that
I
before you went. You
did.
said,
I
I am
did.
not going to
I
post.
did. I did a summary post at the end of each segment.
Mhm.
So I did a summary post at the end of kind of the freewheel and Mary driving around Costa Rica, hiking around, you know, volcanoes and checking out beaches and surfing. I did that one. And then I did, conference. Great to see all my pals back here, San Jose, uh, professional kind of speaker type post. And it was liberating to not feel as though you're compelled to create the content. What I decided, and I don't want to make this all about travel, but what I
Yeah.
did decide
We can
was
make it all about travel. I love travel.
what I did decide was I can do a much better job and detailed, with thoughtful reflection, than I can on the fly, just for the sake of saying I was here. And and to a certain extent, also, when you do that, I don't know, you're kind of creating it. Oh, look at me. Aren't I special? I'm here. Too bad you're in the snow, right? Like, I just, I don't know.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, there's just a bit of a subtle undercurrent that goes with it. And I just feel better about, I do a summary thing, and then when I come back, then I can do the content justice. And also, by then, I've thought, as I said, I've had a time to reflect
Yeah.
on what was meaningful about that experience. What could I share? And then get some more mileage on it, sharing it out on social media with an introduction, a little bit more of a reflection, and here's what you might find meaningful about this piece. Then I've
Mhm.
actually taken the images, the video, I've put it into, video content that is deserving of your time, as opposed to taking 3 hours at night to plug all this stuff out, when I could have been in the bar conversing with my colleagues, or I could have been downstairs making dinner in the hostel, meeting people from all around the world, right? Um,
So
those
true.
are conscious choices.
I love that you said that you decided that in advance.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really good advice because I mean, we're human and we want to, and technology, we're going to connect, we want to connect with people
Mm.
online. It's part of our lives. There's a part of us that has to embrace and accept that that's just the reality. But like we can set our own boundaries and
Mm.
be intentional about it. And
Yes.
I love what you shared there about reflection and having that time to reflect. I took my daughter to a Bruno Mars concert in December. She loves Bruno Mars. And
Mm-hmm.
we went to this Bruno Mars concert, and when we walked into the venue, they put our phones in these little pouches and locked them
Oh,
up.
those apparently are. I was listening. Was it Michael Stelzner? I'm trying. There was some podcast. It wasn't Mark. It might have been Michael Stelzner. It might have been Neil Patel. Somebody was talking about the
Yeah.
cell phone pouches. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
we were totally surprised. And I was like, oh my gosh, no phones, no pictures. So
Mm.
I was totally like kind of just thrown for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you, that was the best, most beautiful gift because
Right.
we were able to enjoy the concert and be fully present and
Mm-hmm.
engaged with all of our senses. And it was a completely different experience. And
Mm-hmm.
there's something about like the memories that you like the memories I have from that concert, I feel are so much richer because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have my phone in there capturing them.
Mm.
They're like in my brain and in my body, you know?
Right.
I don't know. It was just such a special experience. And then afterwards, we decided to sit down and write what we remembered, what we
Mm.
loved about the
Mm.
concert. And that was such a cool connecting activity for us. Like,
Mm-hmm.
just it was me, my sister, and my daughter together. And we're like, let's just write down what did we love? What were the
Mm.
highlights? And it was such a beautiful, clarifying, connecting thing that we did to have it written down.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have never done that if we had have brought our phones in there. I would have
Right.
never thought to do that, you know?
Yeah.
And I just thought, oh, like I was grateful for that
Right.
experience because it helped remind me of like how important it is that we really try to like find the time to live in the moment where we can and put our
Mm.
phones away and be intentional about it and how that changes
Right. We need
our
more.
relationships and
We need more
everything.
of that. We need more of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool.
Yeah.
Man, I could talk to you all day, Mary. Oh my gosh. Well, on our show, we talk about like women in history and like it's all
Mm.
about connecting to the women who've come before us and drawing inspiration and strength from those women and how they've inspired us. So I'd
Mm.
love to learn about who are the women in your life that you've looked up to. Maybe it's one all of our guests have. It's so cool because nobody has ever shared the same person.
Mm.
And I find that so remarkable and cool. And anyway, so who is a woman or women who've really inspired you? I'd love for you to share a story about them and your connection to them.
Well, it's interesting how you initially approached me kind of with the idea, would you come on? And so I went back and I listened to some of your, as you said, some of your previous guests and stuff. And I thought, you know, there's many women that I could
Mhm.
potentially list off in history that are, well known by others. But I asked you, would you have room for something that you would consider, sharing around the everyday women in our lives, perhaps the
Mhm.
unsung heroes, the ones that won't
Yes.
necessarily have books written about them or movies made, but who have made amazing impressions. And so with that as the frame, if that's okay,
Yes.
that with the framework, and I hinted at this in our email exchange, but I mentioned that I'd had a rather unconventional upbringing, and so that my mom's story, and I'll just briefly kind of say this because it was very unconventional in the 60s and 70s. And now I'm kind of like painting myself into an age category here, but my mom was a working mom. She was a teacher. She was a school principal. My dad was 19 years older, so she was the primary income earner in the 60s and 70s. He was the
Mhm.
stay-at-home retired dad, and I grew up thinking that was normal. And so I witnessed an empowered female who was professional, who had income, who uh, bought sports cars, took ski holidays, made, purchased them, or at least it was the major decision maker for holidays.
Mhm.
She bought property, she flipped property, she had investments. And so
Mhm.
I grew up thinking that was normal. And so I would
That's a
say,
great normal. That's a
Well,
great
yeah, and again, you kind of say that now and you go, okay, yeah, that's kind of, but no, that was not normal in the 60s and
Mm-mm.
70s. Like we're back into Leave It to Beaver, Fred Flintstone, time category, right? And not to discount the role of my dad. My dad was, also a bit of a Renaissance man ahead of his time in taking on that role. Picking me up for lunch and and all of that kind of thing, and being the dad that was around. And but I think with what happened with my mom is that she wasn't aware of the power of influence that she had, and she impacted
Mm.
obviously myself, but I've also in sharing, I think you may have even seen it on the social media feed. I was approached by Trans Canada Trail to write an article. I had bought a meter of trail. I was going to say a meter of trail
Oh, wow.
in BC. She had bought a meter of trail back in Ontario, and we sort of talked about how this connected us. And it was the Trans Canada Trail is
Wow.
a walking trail all across Canada. So I wrote this story about it, and what was interesting for me was the number of people that chimed in, and it wasn't just on social media. I got texts, I got phone calls that because my mom has now since passed away, but
Mhm.
the people who reconnected with me to say how much she had influenced
Oh,
their
wow.
lives, and primarily women, but there were a number of guys too. But it was like female friends, cousins, other women colleagues that said she was a role model, she was a trailblazer, and she was the adventurous spirit. And so I think what that really, and I could say, that independence perhaps really sort of helped me forge forward on entrepreneurship, even though she was a teacher, right? She was not an entrepreneur, but it was that independence to create, to
Yeah.
do things on your own, to like, there are no limits. Like, that's what girls
Yeah.
do.
You can create your own
You
path.
can create your own thing. And, but I think for me, what I really reflect on now, because she passed away in 2017 at the ripe old age of 93. So that was a
Wow.
life
She
well
had a
lived.
beautiful life. Yeah.
Um, what that really impresses on me is us, you, Nicole, the role that we play in terms of our everyday lives and the influence that we have on other young women and young girls.
Yes.
They're watching, they're listening, and everything that we do. And you may not think of yourself as this charge forth, change the world, had a monument built about you later, but you are having a massive impact. And so that's what I take from in reflection, what I learned from her, as having that influence on me. And then honestly, it's my own personal responsibility then to take that as potentially my role moving forward for my daughter, for my other friends,
Mm.
colleagues, my son too, right? But it just, but when you see another female do things, all of a sudden it is possible.
So true.
Yeah.
We had another guest on this show share, Chris Harrington shared, if you can see it, you can be it.
Mm,
And as you were describing your mom, obviously, Mary, I don't know you intimately, but
mm.
what I do know about you, as you were describing your mom, I was like, oh my gosh, that sounds so much like Mary. She's like a
Well, yeah, I know.
trailblazer,
I know a few
you
people say
know?
apple tree, right? Yeah.
But in a beautiful way. Like,
Yeah.
you're obviously your own woman and you've
Right.
carved your own unique path as an entrepreneur and you are Mary.
Mm,
But like to see the influence of your mom and who you've become and kind
right.
of like shaping you, creating your own unique
Hmm.
identity and path is really beautiful. How have you seen your mom's influence impact your daughter and your son?
Well, I was very fortunate in that. I mean, I live in Vancouver, out in BC.
Mhm.
I grew up in Ontario, so that's back east. She chose. She upended her life in her 70s and came to BC. Chose to be
Wow.
closer to her
Mhm.
grandchildren, closer to me. No, I was an only child, so I mean, I can
Mhm.
kind of see where she was coming from. So she did have an opportunity to have a huge impact on their lives. That Grandma Day. And honestly, she was helping me when they were young, and I was working out of a home office before it was cool to have a home office. When you your website copy talked about us and we when it was only you. And, when you answered the phone call and you ran into the closet and, to try and keep a toddler from like following you.
Yes, I've been there.
So, and they'd have grandma days. And so, they had
Sweet.
that. And of course, that came full circle in the latter years where, she lived independently on her own, but she certainly required some support. And I was there to help and to help arrange that and to do what I could do as well. So,
I think that's so beautiful that we all just
it's a full circle moment.
We take care of each other at different phases of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really beautiful. My grandmother, she also was a working mom, actually. And it wasn't necessarily by choice. My grandfather was a construction worker and he had an injury on the job. And so he couldn't have it. He broke his back. So she ended up having to go back to work. Probably, I think it must have been 1960. And she was a stenographer and she worked full time for McDonnell Douglas in Long Beach.
Wow.
And she worked all the way until retirement age. And, she just humbly and never talked. It was just, and she'd come home every day and she'd make dinner. She'd do the laundry. She just did it all.
Well, that's the superheroes right there that assumed,
never complained,
assumed the homemaker role on top of everything. I'm sure their cape fell off occasionally, but
yeah, I just think she was such an unassuming, humble woman who was really breaking barriers in a big way. And I just really, and I loved what you shared, Mary, about like the women are, people are your children, other people around you are watching you. I've noticed that like with my daughters, I have 2 daughters, and my youngest daughter is so curious about this podcast. She's like, can I come be a guest on the show? And so I actually interviewed her.
Oh,
she's
fun.
going to have she's going to have an episode come out because she was so curious about it. Like, and I was in Florida last week and I was doing a workshop in Florida.
I think I saw that all day. So you had yourself set up.
She was like, Mom, she said to me before I went, she's like, Mom, why don't you practice your workshop on me? And I was like, okay, let's do this. You can give me, she's like, I'm going to give you some tips.
Oh,
so it's bedtime. And I'm like practicing for her. And she's like, she'd stop me. She's like, okay, Mom, well, you're doing really good with your hand gestures, but I think you're saying the word also a little too much. So you can work on that.
How old is she?
She's 9.
Okay.
It was just like a beautiful moment where I loved it. And then I was like, do you want to come help me pick out my outfits? What should I bring? And she was like all excited to do it. And so I've just loved involving my kids as much as possible because I've always really loved working. I was a stay-at-home mom for a couple of years when my youngest was born. And I realized that wasn't for me. I needed something more. And I think as women, sometimes, no matter whether we choose to be home with our kids or not, we always feel that guilt a little bit. And as I've gotten older, I've just realized I just want to, like, there's something beautiful and special about the fact that I want to create something else, and why not let them see the joy that I find in that, so that they can see that whatever lights them up, whatever it is, that it's okay. And they should be joyful about it and celebrate it, because every woman's path is so unique and so different, and we don't fit in a different thing, but whatever we decide we want to do, let's celebrate it for the women around us so they can see that,
and it's interesting. I think that I mentioned a couple of the women, there's, beyond just my mom, obviously that's my first and foremost hero, but there's the quiet leaders out there, not necessarily the ones that you think that sort of broke the glass ceiling, that, led, were leading like, broke into the guys group or whatever. They're the ones, I call them the quiet leaders, that helped bring out the best in others. An opportunity to work with a lady called Tess, Teresita Areno Manalo, but affectionately referred to as Tess. And she, I would call her a soft leader, high emotional IQ. She didn't play to win in the traditional kind of men's game. But it was that whole, she brought out the best in everyone and quietly just asserted just this, I don't know, she created loyalty. like immense loyalty to the point where you wanted to do anything to make her happy, because she had helped you so much. And it's this interesting, quiet leadership.
Yeah.
That it's not boastful, and her success is when you take the experience and fly away. That is that kind of leadership. And it's a rare quality. And it's,
It is.
you know, she I knew Tess through way back when I did my MBA at City University, City U, and in Vancouver, City U, Seattle, but they were in Vancouver campus. And then I went on to teach there in the marketing program at her urging. She changed institutions, went over to Spratshaw Degree College, which later became Exenda School of Management. I continued to teach some courses for her. At one point, she had me the marketing department head, and I said, like, I can only do this part time. And then things grew, and then I had to kind of give that give that up. But it was this incredible loyalty. And again, I was reminded of that just recently in November. Exenda celebrated their 20th anniversary. I was asked to MC the event, and I was, delighted to do that. And we had, and again, Tess is another one of those leaders who's since passed along. She died, far too young, from cancer quite suddenly. But we did a kind of a what do you call it, a memorial, like
a tribute?
A tribute. Yes, that's the word I'm looking for. A tribute to her at that event. And it really kind of struck me that all the people who had attended from the last 20 years, how she was the thread. She was, and we talked about that in the social before and after, how Tess was the thread. And she was the quiet, she was this short little woman too, right? Like, she was the quiet thread that united it all. And it was that fierce loyalty that really became part of the values that held that company together. And that then formed the kind of people that they hired. So her leadership was far reaching. And again, if you said to her, unfortunately we can't because she's no longer around, but if you said to her, about her leadership style, and she would be the first person to humbly suggest that I wasn't leading, I was just being Tess. So, I think, and that's a quality you can, it's not just, in women, you can see that quality in guys as well.
Absolutely.
I've met male leaders that have that quality. And I have a tremendous amount of respect for leadership that doesn't need to be big and bold and seem like they're leading, that they do it quietly, but they get it out of loyalty. They get it out of respect. And Tess was one of those people.
Oh, that's a beautiful tribute to her. It reminds me of my grandma, who quietly led the way that she did. And it also makes me think about, like, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lilly Ledbetter, the Lilly Ledbetter Act in the US. Lilly Ledbetter was basically, she was paid a lower salary for decades at a job. And she was what's the word I want to say? Someone left a note in her locker that basically anonymously told her, you've been underpaid for all these years. And that anonymous person had a huge impact on the future of, like, equal pay for women.
Right.
We to this day do not know who that person is. And I think like you said, that you need all kinds of leadership in the world, and it takes collaboration and many people to make change happen. And if that person wouldn't have quietly teed her off,
and
I don't know if that's the word.
Yeah, well,
tipped her off. That's what it is.
Yeah,
tipped her off. If that person would have tipped her off, who knows what would have happened,
right.
And so sometimes bravery doesn't need to be on a pedestal.
No. And that story is that much more magical because it remains anonymous.
Yeah. So true. Very cool. What was your mother's name?
Nancy.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a wonderful tribute to Nancy today. Yeah. We're so glad that she's here. And man, look at the wonderful legacy she's created for you and for your family and all the cool stuff you're doing. It's amazing. Oh, man. So I have another question for
Sure.
you, and that is, and this will be our final question, is if you were to have a conversation with your older self in her final moments,
Mm.
what would she tell you and what would she want you to know?
Well, I'd hope she'd say you did good.
I think you're doing great, Mary. I
you
think you're
you
doing
loved
great.
and you were loved. But okay,
Oh,
so
you
but
loved and you were loved. That's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah, I would hope, right, that but if it was her talking to me right now, I think it would probably be something like, you've always been driven by achievement.
Mm.
You've always been a builder, launching new ideas. You love the chase, right? Uh,
Oh, yeah.
but it's okay to maybe let up on the chase a little bit. Maybe go for the ride, enjoy, right? What
Mm.
you've created, and she'd probably say you're on the right track in terms of chasing down the travel journalism. Go have
Mm.
fun, and go do more of that. Right? You're on
Do
the
more
right
of the
track. I
fun.
think I think that's what she'd say. Yeah,
I love
but
that. Like
yeah,
she would want you to play more.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
do you think she would say something different to your younger self?
To my younger self,
Like your 20-year-old
my
self?
20-year-old self, I think she'd reassure me
Yeah.
that the line between 20 and the age that you are right now will not be a straight line, but it was not meant to be. And the the things that and people and experiences that you'll have along the way will cause you to do this, and that is what creates a rich life. If we knew what you were going to do and where you're going to be at that point, and you just took the straight trip there, it would be kind of, you wouldn't be who you are. And so I think, that message to my younger, or all younger selves, is to understand that weaving journey is what you're meant to experience. Uh, you know, I think, for moms, I think that's, it can be sometimes hard to watch. Certainly it can be hard for kids to experience. Like, there's so much pressure on our
Mhm.
kids in their 20s, late teens,
Yes.
early 20s, to pick what they're going to study. I mean, for God's sakes, they don't know. And a lot of that, a lot of their choices are made to make their parents happy and proud. And of course, as a parent, that's what you want to be. But at the same time, your 20s are meant to, kind of experience lots of different things, to maybe stumble and fall and learn from that, as opposed to having, parents swing in and fix it for you. And I mean, that's where it comes back to, this notion of travel too. That's, you do a lot of growing up when you travel.
Yeah.
You have to independently make your decisions. You learn how to be with other people. My mom used to say, if you can travel with somebody, honey, you can live with them, right? And that's
It's
pretty
true.
good sage advice.
It's very true.
Because I've done some traveling with my husband. This last year we were away for like a month cycling in Corsica, on a U-Track
Ooh.
self-guided cycling tour. And the thing is, travel causes you to make, like, you're confronted with decisions around comfort, where you're going to stay, around money, around your comfort with risk, right? There's decision making, there's conflict resolution. All of that happens in a much shorter period of time in travel than it does in day-to-day life. And so, you can learn a lot about a person while doing that. So, where am I coming back, circling back on that one with that advice to the younger self, is that, just enjoy the weaving journey, and and before you go live with someone or go get married, go travel with them.
Yes. Such great
Like,
advice.
honestly, like you, a lot of things, like, it just, even just your values, right? Like, how do you want to
Yep.
spend today? Do you want to be with other
Yep.
people? Do you want to be independent? Do you want to go look at history stuff, right? Or also understanding that, yeah, you're together, but it's okay to spend a day apart if you have some really niche interests that each of you want to explore, and then come back at the end of it and share it, right? Like, but again, those are confidence things that come with maturity, right? um
Mm-hmm.
that again, you do that kind of growing up when you are experiencing life, living away, taking different jobs. It's okay. It's okay to learn what you don't want to do, because that
Yeah.
leads you towards what you do want to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sorry is the person that goes off to university, studies what their parents told them to do, and gets locked into a career job with a mortgage and family, and realizes when they wake up one day, this isn't really what I want to do, and you're kind of stuck.
Yeah, it's a
Right?
lot harder to change at that
Yeah.
point, for
It's not that
sure.
you can't,
Yeah.
but it's a lot more disruptive.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love what you shared
Mm,
about the weaving journey and
mm,
embracing that. Like, literally brought tears to my eyes, because I
mm,
think that's just such wise advice. Like, so much of the time we put on, especially if you are a type A, perfectionist type of person, high achieving, it's like you got to have it all figured out and it's all got to be this path. But it is so true that it's the surprises and the detours and the unexpected failures along the way
mm,
that really shape us and
mm-hmm,
help us get to the next point. And it just, like, when you're traveling, it's the surprises that are the most
mm-hmm,
amazing.
right,
Like turning a corner on a street into a beautiful square that you've never seen before
right.
for the first time and seeing it, or turning around a corner and coming upon like a beautiful bakery. Like, I was in London last summer and I was like, I'm just going to not schedule my day.
Mm-hmm,
I'm just going to go and I'm just going to walk and I'm going to see what happens.
mm-hmm,
It was magical. Like,
mm,
I would just, and because I had nothing planned, I was just like, oh, what's this over here? There's this beautiful bakery with these beautiful treats. And
mm,
I was able to just enjoy it in the moment in a way that I wouldn't if it felt like I was being rushed along to try
right,
to make it somewhere, you know?
right.
I love that. So
And
true.
it's funny. I was just in New York
Mm,
for Travel Writers Conference, IMM, and I flew my daughter out. She's a university student. We jokingly
mhm.
say that she's in her 6th year of a 4-year degree. Um,
I love that. She's a learner.
yeah, yeah. No, she's changed her majors twice or 3 times. She's
Uh-huh.
also experienced COVID during all that. Like, yeah,
She's on the weaving journey.
she is definitely on a weaving journey. But I flew her out to join me for a mom daughter weekend. So I had my conference on the Thursday. Yeah, so we had a day on bit on Wednesday. She had the day Thursday on her own, and then we had Friday and Saturday with touring and Broadway show. But her, we talk about apple tree. She so she had that Thursday on her own, and just the serendipitous moments, and then coming back and sharing with me what she did. Right, I remember my advice
Mm.
to her was like, just enjoy New York, but don't fall in love, right? Like, but she went to the Met. She went,
Mm.
and just listening to her talking about the stuff she saw at the Met, and then how it's leads back into what she'd learned in sort of courses, anthropology, and
Mm.
and just all these things. Like, oh my God, just such rich conversations, and serendipitous moments, right? Just she looked up, I'm sure on Instagram or TikTok, some, was it Leo's Bagels and all these different places that she was going to go see, and then the conversation she had, right? She said, I turned my phone off, so I could talk to people, and I took photos, but I anyway. So it's
Mm.
how did we get down that hole?
Serendipity. We're just on the weaving journey.
We're on the weaving journey.
You were sharing about how your daughter, you took her out to New
Right,
York.
right, yeah, no, just oh my God, no, but it is, the weaving journey, but these serendipitous moments and being open to unplanned, right, and yeah, and it is lovely to see then our kids take that attitude towards things, and discover their own journeys. There we go. There's the way I brought it back. Right, it's
You
the weave.
so cool. And I love the Met's beautiful. I
Yeah.
will just always be in love with the Rodin exhibit at the Met.
Mm,
It is so
mm,
well, I mean, there's many
mm,
beautiful exhibits there, but the Rodin exhibit in
mm.
particular is just magical.
Right. I've got to get that on my list next year when I go back
Yeah.
for because it's a regular conference I attend. I, I would love to just go and spend a day there.
I love how we've been talking so much about serendipity. So as we
Mm.
close out our episode, Mary, I'd love to know, what are like maybe one or two of the most serendipitous travel experiences that just come to your head right away?
Mm. Serendipitous. You know what? I'll go back to this past summer in Croatia with my husband. We did this. We did the cycling tour in Corsica. We did the ferry over to Italy. We trundled around Italy. Then we went over to Croatia. I know it sounds kind of a weird, but we did it all, so we'd have to avoid airports. And we're meeting up for a friend's big birthday there. But we hadn't really encountered over tourism and a lot of busyness in Corsica and Italy. But when we got to Croatia, we started to see the impacts of over tourism in Split. We didn't plan to go down to Dubrovnik. Well, maybe leave that for another trip or not, just because it is so over touristed. But we had an experience in Karka National Park. It's beautiful. And we eventually did get up to this other area, Roski Slap. We got a tip from a local kind of where to go to get away from the crowds. But I would say a serendipitous moment is that we decided just on the fly, we had a rental car, and I said, we need to change our plans. Like, we were going to go to this other national park the next day. And so I just started looking and scrolling for, initially it was around renting a boat. We thought, let's just go north up to, maybe Peg Island. Like, let's go north and get away from the tourists. And we're both sailors. We're both licensed boaters. And so we thought, initially I was looking for boats, but then I found this other place, this really cool place. It was called the Olive Garden, Olive Tree. Oh my God, I should remember the name of it. It's on my blog, on Peg Island. And it was like one of these, like, this looks really cool. And I said to my husband, he said, yeah, okay. So I just book it. And we had the most amazing experience on that island, really away from the crowds. The host, it was like this waterfront place. It was a unit in this house, this little town. She was actually American. They live there 6 months a year. She's married to a fellow from Germany. We stayed in the suite that had been the suite that they stayed in when they first bought the property, because they used to, I guess her husband's family used to vacation there. They went down from Germany down to what had been then Yugoslavia. They decided they wanted to buy property there, and so we stayed in that place and, wandered around the little town, the little beaches, talked to the boats, the owners coming in, the fisher, the fishermen. That was a serendipitous, more than a moment. It was several days, but it was a serendipitous moment that caused us to go there. And again, that was time that we had left unplanned, but I'd had a rough plan on where else we were going to go, and we changed it on the fly due to an experience. And honestly, it was the over tourism drove us to have a serendipitous moment that was probably one of the more memorable pieces of that trip. It was that unexpected surprise, right? Yeah.
I love that. I love the people. Like, you talk about the people. That's beautiful. Like, so much of the serendipitous moments that we have are serendipitous because of the people that we meet or we encounter, or the relationships that we have, or that we connect with more deeply through those experiences.
Well, it's even the stories, so cool. Right? Learning the stories of the family and how they had come down there, and realizing the history, right? Okay, that was Yugoslavia. That was like, there was the war, there was, right? And how that area had been, we went through areas that had been, like, we saw like old homes that have had like bullet holes and like, tank holes through them, where they just chosen to build next door. So you could still see the ravages of war in, on the mainland. But like, hearing that part of the family's story of how they had come there since then, how they had, chosen to buy that property, and why it was so special, and how, frankly, we just ended up there. It was shoulder season, September, right? She said they're totally booked out during the summer. We just happened at that time, she had an opening at, right, the perfect place. And like I said, created that memory.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
Oh, Mary, thank you for coming on the show. This has been such a joy. I love talking to you, and I thank you for telling us about your mom and your daughter and your son and Tess and so many wonderful people that have influenced you. And thank you for being such a wonderful influence in the work that you're doing. I love reading your content. is so insightful as someone who loves to travel. I love the way that you travel. It's very inspiring.
Thanks,
How
Nicole.
thoughtfully that you travel. So how can our listeners get a hold of you and connect with you? I know you mentioned carryonqueen.com,
Yeah,
right?
so carryonqueen.com is my travel writing site, and lots of travel and inspiration on there. Canada, US, international, it's all there. You can, and if you're interested from the marketing strategy side, there is the 5minutemarketing.com. So it's FIVE, minutemarketing.com. And from a marketing, consulting, speaking in particular, as it relates to travel industry. I also do a regular newsletter out of 5minutemarketing.com, and it's kind of weekly, although I've kind of gone bi-weekly at that one since the new year, out of an experiment, and the Carry On Queens monthly. So yeah, I either of those. We can put both websites in the show notes if you like. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Mary, for sharing your wisdom and your moxie with us today. And like Mary, every step forward into discomfort is proof of your moxie. So trust your voice, own your power, and lift others along the way. And we'll see you next time on Hello Moxie. That's a wrap for today's episode of Hello Moxie. I hope you felt that unbreakable thread connecting you to the women of the past, to the trailblazing pioneers of today. Their stories of audacity, resilience, and courage are a powerful reminder of what's possible for you when you choose to live with moxie.